Hi, I just want to show you this. A few weeks ago I had to turn to my local food bank. As a nurse, I never thought I would have to do this. I've also taken advantage of my town's community fridge. I feel demoralised at doing the job I do. I've had to resort to this. Austerity has hit me hard. This is what I got. What's also disturbing about this is that this lady, her family therefore, they have no choice about what they're going to eat. Their choice of food is taken away from them because they are relying on charity. They are relying on what they're given to eat. And most of what they're being given to eat is being donated by a public who themselves, by majority, are also suffering austerity. And at the same time, we've got an election coming up. Jeremy Corbyn's proposed to increase taxes, so people on £80,000 a year now will be paying an extra £20 a month in tax, which is actually a minority of the British population. So the average person on, say, between 30 and 40 or 50,000 a year, and people on even less than that, are paying on average around £5 a week or more to donate to food banks and to donate to people they see homeless, struggling, destitute on the street, or helping friends and family out. They're probably paying about £20, £30, £40 a month trying to help people, the victims of austerity. They're not complaining. I haven't heard any of them complaining about how much extra money they're having to spend a month on giving to food banks and poor people and their destitute friends and family members. No, they're complaining about the fact that people are in this situation in the first place. Now, Boris Johnson recently has been complaining about a class war. Apparently, the rich people are being attacked. But, as usual, he's got it totally upside down, because that's what he is. He is the fool. He's there because he's shameless, and he will shamelessly lie and spin and twist the facts and just say whatever he wants, just like Trump does. Regardless of the truth staring us all in the face, he'll turn round and say, no, black is white and white is black, and 3 and 3 make 25. And he'll keep pushing it, and people like Rupert Murdoch will keep giving him the support and keep on labelling Jeremy Corbyn as Stalin or as an anti-Semite because he criticises Zionist atrocities against Palestinian people and actually even Jewish people and Christian people living in Israel and Palestine. Now, I wonder how this lady would feel to realise that at the start of austerity, Europe had offered Britain £22 million to help subsidise Britain's food banks, but the money was blocked by the UK government. Okay, and at the time there were more than 1 million food parcels were given out between 2014 and 2015. I think this would have been for a year, per year. More than 400,000 of which went to children. Most Reverend Justin Welby urged the Prime Minister to reverse the decision to reject EU funds for food banks, but to no avail. British government officials explained that the government rejected the EU funding for food banks because it considers that member states are best placed to take charge of such funding. the Department of Work and Pensions commented that the government was not saying no to the money, but rather no to Europe about how it should be spent. So, in other words, they were happy to have the money, but not for the money to go only specifically to food banks. So if it was specifically for food banks, then no, they don't want the money. So basically, he rejected the money. He said, no, we don't want it. That is a crime. Okay? This is a crime. This is evidence of crime. This is evidence of a class war that's been orchestrated by these Tories, really from Thatcher, but in full force under Cameron and his abominable cabal. This is a war against the working classes, a war against the political opposition that they have driven into poverty and removed their legal rights to legal aid. So therefore the people have got no legal rights. They're ready on the brink of scrapping our human rights. So therefore that is a war against the political opposition, the people who are most likely to vote Labour, and the people responsible who've orchestrated this war are the Tories and the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems who let the Tories in, and the Lib Dems who stood by the Tories every step of the way. And they will continue to do that, regardless of what Jo Swinson says. She will turn on a pin to stand with Boris Johnson against Jeremy Corbyn, because it's a class war. And the Lib Dems and the Tories are united against the working people of Britain in favour of the criminal corporations, because that's what usury does. That's why usury, traditionally and under God's law, is a crime. Because capitalism, corporate capitalism, permitted to run amok, unchecked, unrestricted, it will leave people working for donations. So that, basically, you're at slavery. So this nurse is a slave, because a slave doesn't get a choice of the food that they eat. That's one of the basic fundamental points of slavery, is that you do not get a choice. You have to eat what you're given. Because you've got no money to buy food, you haven't got that freedom to make a choice about what you eat. You eat what you are given, and you work. You get up and you go to work every day. And for that you'll have some shelter, access to water, some clothing. All of it provided by the slave owners. So when it's being provided by charities like this, and the government has actually issued a statement, a public statement, stating that they are not responsible, they are not legally responsible to provide food for people in times of need. Whether that be through austerity, Brexit, a catastrophe, they are not legally responsible to provide food. That is what they have stated. And it's shared here in the links that the government says they do not need to provide food. There we go. Government says it has no duty to secure food supplies in a no-deal Brexit nor any other crisis. And I will leave you the link to this article, Intel for Investigation, Brexit, because it lists the crimes of this government and previous Tory governments, and even the Blair government. We're talking about Tories' involvement in illegal nuclear weapons, stealing millions of pounds from the public purse to go straight into Tory party coffers, using the existence of these illegal weapons to justify an illegal invasion into Iraq and using illegal weapons in the process. All of that is crime that needs investigating. Boris Johnson, David Cameron, both of these cabal leaderships need serious investigation. They need to be prosecuted and held on criminal charges. This is evidence. Food bank. What this nurse is going through is evidence of an attack, of a war against the working people. Actually forcing people to the conditions of slavery, that people are working, but they're having no choice of what they eat and they're having to rely on a charity. Because our welfare, our system of welfare, which by 21st century standards, you know, it's the norm, it's humanity. Humans, we look after each other. We don't leave people destitute and dependent on slave standard living. That, oh yeah, well, you know, we've given her some beans and all these tomatoey things, and she's got some pasta there. She doesn't need to enjoy cooking a meal for a family with food that she'd like to eat or have any choice. She'll use what soap she's given. Perhaps she's allergic to that soap. What would a vegetarian do, or a vegan even? Or somebody who's dependent on halal food. People with specialist diets, a diabetic. It is absolutely outrageous, and it is outrageous. I feel that a nation could tolerate this. That's why this general election is not like any other election that has been held, really, since Attlee got voted into power. It is voting, the vote now for Jeremy Corbyn is equivalent to post-World War II, because we have been through a war and it's been ongoing since Thatcher, and it's time for that war to end now. It is time for us to put a human being into office. Forget the political labels. We're looking at criminals and human beings. That's the choice. Now, Jo Swinson, she might be a nice woman. I'm sure there's a lot of very nice Lib Dem party members, but I'm very sorry, you all have stood by a set of criminals. You've voted with them, you've supported them, you have created and facilitated this situation that people like this lady, nurses, have had to resort to food banks. The NHS staff are on the front lines of austerity. They're the ones that receive the victims of it, the people who've been driven to destitution and become ill as a result of that. And while being forced to work in and provide a service within an institution that is being systematically run down, deprived of funds, deprived of staff, doing the jobs of 3-4 people, overworked, underpaid, and themselves having to rely on food banks. Are we surprised to find that suicide rates among NHS staff have spiked? Doctors and nurses in their hundreds committing suicide. They're the ones that have to deal with the suicides, the failed suicides, attempted suicides. They're the ones that have to deal with it. And this is what they're left dependent on. People providing care to people in their homes, themselves overworked, underpaid, themselves being forced to rely on food banks. That's slavery. That's slavery. When you can't choose what food you eat, you are a slave. That's when you know you're a slave. When you're being fed like cattle, and not even from the government itself that has created this situation. Because, you know, as Sajid Javid stated in his plans for turning Britain into a post-Brexit Britain into a tax haven, you know, sweeping fiscal tax cuts in a shock and awe strategy as a weapon, a tool. That's what austerity is. It is an economic tool, an economic weapon, economic warfare, economic terrorism, orchestrated by criminals. As I say, all of the evidence is shared here. Check it out, investigate it, because, you know, it's evidence for investigation and it needs to be investigated. So what would we expect criminals to do? They have been killing British people, 130,000 dead. That's a massacre. Okay? That's a massacre. That's what it is. Nobody stopped to remember them. There's going to be no Remembrance Day for the 130,000 dead in less than 10 years. So how is it that Boris Johnson can sit on BBC News and not once has the BBC or any of the mainstream TV news providers had them up about this, about the fact that they rejected funds for food banks from the EU? And why? Because they didn't want anybody in Britain to be seeing the EU in a good light, because they were getting ready to prime the British public for hating the EU and all the immigrants apparently that have been coming into Britain, and it's them that are responsible for austerity, the scapegoat. You know, demoralise people, drive them to destitution, present them with the scapegoat. This time it's the immigrant or the Muslim or the benefit claimant, the poor, the disabled, the sick. So, you know, people who were talking about tactical voting and all that, look, forget what people voted in previous elections. This, as I say, this election is unlike no other. We're talking, this is going to be the end of the war now, the end of the class war, because the people, we had our vote, we had our say, we established our welfare state, our democratic socio-capitalist society, because we never abolished capitalism. We were never communist. This is, what is this if not communism? That's actually, it's even worse than communism, because this isn't the state that has provided this, is it? This isn't the state. And people on 80,000 a year are complaining at the thought of having to pay an extra £20 a month tax, when people on £40,000 a year are paying an extra £20, £30, £40 to help the people around them stay alive. Even nurses. It's outrageous. It's disgusting. It's intolerable. It's criminal. And that's what this is. Evidence of crime. Crime and criminality. Abuses of human rights. Every single member of this Tory government needs to be prosecuted up on charges, because they have committed economic murder. They have maimed people. They have broken people's lives. They have torn families apart. They have ruined. They've brought ruin and destitution, even threatened the breakup of our United Kingdom, and are already are actually poised to gain billions from wrecking our sovereign currency. They've attacked our economy, the economic structure of our nation, in favour of improving profits for foreign powers. They are agents of foreign powers. Russian, Zionist Israeli and Trump America. Russian oligarchs. We need to see that Russia report. But how has Britain tolerated it? Well, we've been patient. We've been quiet. It's time now to get to the polls. Like I say, Everybody, forget what the papers are saying about the polls. They're telling you a pack of lies to demoralise you. Just get out there, vote human, vote Labour. That's your choice. You're either going to vote with criminals that have reduced people to this, nurses to this, or you're going to vote for a human being, and you're going to vote for Jeremy Corbyn and his party, the people who stand with him. Because we need the changes that he's going to bring, which aren't radical, they're just restoration to restore Britain to what we were before we even entered the EU. An independent nation with our independent sovereign currency, with our nationalised and independently owned businesses and services, with an NHS, with free education, with workers' rights, with a living wage, with a benefit system. That's what we were before we entered the EU, but the Tories want to bring us out of the EU with all of that gone as well. Double losses. Nobody can vote for that unless, what, are you a sadist? Do you enjoy watching people suffer? Does it give you pleasure to witness what's happening to our country? Does it give you pleasure to think that nurses are having to turn to a food bank and a community fridge? So like I say, people, forget what the 2017 election was. Just understand that this is an election like no other election before. Okay? You might, your area might have been Conservative previously. They might have been Lib Dem previously. But things have changed. Priorities have changed. People are waking up to reality. Because that's what we're facing. And I tell you, all the people now who are comfortably off, if you are daft enough to vote for the criminals and their complicits, which the Lib Dems, that's what they are. There's no two ways about it. And quite a few Labour MPs who consistently voted against Corbyn and would prefer to stand with the Lib Dems and Tories, the enemy within. That is the choice. Criminals and their complicits, or human beings who uphold the law and our rights. Right? You see, this isn't politics. Our rights are what every politician should be standing up for. It really should never be a political choice to vote for people who want to scrap all our rights. That isn't a political choice, because that's an intent to commit crime. Any any politician that comes forward and says we want to scrap human rights, we have to understand that that is a threat. And that is written in the United Nations Human Rights Act, that any government that threatens to change or alter or scrap those rights, that is a crime in itself against our human rights, even to make that suggestion. So, the Tories are criminal. It's high time that the civil servants now of Britain got together, and the MPs, and brought criminal charges against this government for crimes against humanity. And using economy as a fiscal weapon and tax cuts for the very rich as a fiscal weapon. A shock and awe strategy is what we have been under, and they want to deliver even worse through Brexit, as you will see when you read the intel for investigation Brexit. We are in very, very serious times, and the only people that are going to get us out of this are we the people. We need to come to our own rescue, because nobody's going to do it for us. And what can I say? I really still think that this GE should be suspended, because it's a criminal government. We can't trust the results. I'm very suspicious about these fake polls that are being shown now, because to me that's just, it's just the forerunner for a rigged election that they could say, yeah, well, you know, the polls said Boris was ahead by so many points. I'm sorry, I'm not buying that. I do not believe that the majority of the people of this country are daft enough and cold-hearted enough to give another term to these monsters, lying, criminal, thieving, murderous monsters. That's what they are. And it's time for them to go. And like I say, arrest and prosecute, please, because we just cannot ignore the levels of crime that have been going on, and we cannot ignore this. And to think that the Tories have actually come out and openly stated that basically Brexit, they want a Brexit knowing that it's going to bring 50 years of worse than this, you know, worse austerity. Because as I say, as the public get poorer and poorer and poorer, who's going to be able to afford money for food banks? And there'll be no EU there even to offer us to stock our food banks, will there? It cannot go on. It cannot go on. Please, if you've not registered to vote, do it. And make sure you get out there and vote. And help other people to vote as well. Offer your neighbours transport. You know, we all need to pull together because, like I say, that's how we survive as a species. When we stand together, when we unite.